Hello, everyone, and welcome to Vex Warfield. I am Vex, your host. And tonight, we're going to do a little story with Scrimshaw Rose. Essentially, we're going to start back, well, to tell you the truth, she knows way more about this than I do. And, I'll give you the title real quick. Basically, the beginnings of New England and the Puritan Theocracy and its relations to civil and religious liberty by John Fiske. Houghton. Yeah, that's Houghton. John Fiske Houghton. Mifflin and Company publisher. And just for giggles, it was done by the Riverside Press. So, without further ado, we'll go ahead and bring Scrimshaw up and we'll get this going. Hello, Scrimshaw. Welcome.
Hi. How's it going?
Pretty good. You got a little story for us tonight, don't you?
Yes, I do. Actually, it's kind of a long story, so I'm going to try to get through one chapter, but I'm only going to read for about 10 minutes so I don't bore you guys to death.
Right.
But eventually this gets into how the Puritans came over here and what caused them to come over here and, different aspects of, creating the colonies and all, and what their relationships were to the Native Americans. This is kind of an older book. It was published in 1898, so they use the word Indians. Hi, Rhyme of the Ancients. So actually, I'm kind of copying you, Rhyme of the Ancients, because I'm going to be reading this book. So the first chapter is more about musings from the Romans, and they go all the way through history a little bit and with the way he thought about it, and finally get to the beginning of the Puritans coming over. So this is sort of a big ass introduction, if you don't mind my saying. So the publisher is Houghton Mifflin. Okay. All right. I'm going to start now. Okay. The beginnings of New England, chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
The Roman idea and the English idea. It used to be the fashion of historians looking superficially at the facts presented in chronicles and tables of dates without analyzing and comparing vast groups of facts distributed through centuries, or even suspecting the need for such analysis and comparison, to assign the date 476 AD as the moment at which the Roman Empire came to an end. It was in that year that the soldier of fortune, Odovacar, commander of the Herulian mercenaries in Italy, sent the handsome boy Romulus, the son of Orestes, better known as Little Augustus, from his imperial throne to the splendid villa of Lucullus near Naples, and gave him a yearly pension of 6,000 solidi to console him for the loss of a world. As 324 years elapsed before another emperor was crowned at Rome, and the political leadership of Europe after that happy restoration remained upon the German soil to which the events of the 8th century had shifted it, nothing could seem more natural than the habit which historians once had of saying that the mighty career of Rome had ended as it had begun with the Romulus. Sometimes the date 476 was even set up as a great landmark, dividing modern and from ancient history. For those, however, who took such a view, it was impossible to see the events of the Middle Ages in their true relations to what went before and what came after. It was impossible to understand what went on in Italy in the 6th century, or to explain the position of the great Roman power, which had its center on the Bosphorus, which is the code of Justinian, left us our greatest the grandest monument of Roman law, and which for 1,000 years was staunch bulwark of Europe against the successive aggressions of Persian, Saracen, and Turk. It was equally impossible to understand the rise of papal power and all-important politics of the great Saxon and Swabian emperors, the relation of medieval England to the continental powers, or the marvelously interesting growth of the modern European system of nationalities. Since the middle of the 19th century, the study of history has undergone changes no less sweeping than those which have in the same time affected the study of physical sciences. Vast groups of facts distributed through various ages and countries have been subjected to comparison and analysis, with the result that they have not only thrown fresh light upon one another, but have in many cases enabled us to recover historic points of view that had long been buried in oblivion. Such an instance was furnished about 25 years ago by Dr. Bryce's epoch-making work on the Holy Roman Empire. Since the historians still recognize the importance of the date 476 as that which left the Bishop of Rome the dominant personage in Italy and marked the shifting of the political center of gravity in the Palatine to the Latinine. This was one of those subtle changes which escape notice until after some of their effects have attracted attention. The most important effect in this instance realized after 3 centuries, was not the overthrow of Roman power in the West, but its indefinite extension and expansion. The men of 476 not only had no idea that they were entering upon a new era, but least of all, did they dream that the Roman Empire had come to an end or was ever likely to. Excuse me. Its cities might be pillaged, its provinces overrun, but the supreme imperial power itself was something without which the men of those days could not imagine the world as existing. It might have had its divinely ordered representative in one place, if not another. If the throne in Italy was vacant, it was no more than had happened before. There was still a throne at Constantinople, and to its occupant Zeno and the Roman Senate sent a message saying that one emperor was enough for both ends of the earth, and begging him to confer upon the gallant Odovacar the title of patrician and entrust the affairs of Italy to his care. So when Sicambrian Chlodwig set up his Merovingian kingdom in northern Gaul, he was glad to array himself in the robe of Roman consul and obtain from the Eastern emperor a formal ratification of his rule. Countless examples show the event of 476 was understood as the virtual reunion of West and East under a single head, whereas on the other hand, the impressive scene in the Basilica of St. Peter's on the Christmas of 800, when Pope Leo III placed the diadem of the Caesars upon the Frankish brow of the Charles the Great, was regarded not as the restoration of an empire once extinguished, but as a new separation between East and West, a retransfer of the world's political center from the Bosphorus to the Tiber. When, after 2 centuries more, the scepter had passed from the line of Frankish Charles to the line of Saxon Otto, this Holy Roman Empire, shaped by the alliance of a German king with Italian pontiff, acquired such consistency as to outlast the whole group of political conditions in which it originated. These conditions endured for 5 centuries after the coronation in 800. The empire preserved a continuous existence for yet 5 centuries more, until the downfall of the great Hohenstaufen emperors, late in the 13th century, soon followed by the Babylonish exile of the popes at Avignon, the men of Western Europe, who felt themselves, in a certain sense, members of the political whole of which Rome was the center. By the beginning of the 16th century, this feeling had almost disappeared. Men's world had enlarged until Rome no longer seemed so great to them as it had seemed to their forefathers who had lived under its mighty spell, or as it seems to us who view it through the lenses of history. Within its own imperial domains, power nations had slowly grown up, whose speech would have sounded strange to Cicero, while beyond ocean were found new lands where the name of Caesar had never been heard. By the side of Louis XII or Ferdinand of Aragon, it was not easy to recognize a grander dignity in the Habsburg successor of Augustus, and the mutterings of a revolt against papal supremacy already heralded in the storm which was soon to rend all Christendom in twain. After the Reformation, with the conception of a universal Christian monarchy as held whether by St. Augustine or by Dante, had ceased to have a meaning and faded from men's memories. Yet in its forms and titles, the Holy Roman Empire continued to survive, until, as Voltaire said, it has come to be neither holy nor Roman nor an empire, so long as it did remain upon the scene that in 1790 an illustrious American philosopher, Benjamin Thompson, a native of Woburn in Massachusetts and sometime dweller in Rumsford, New Hampshire, was admitted to a share in its dignities, sorry about that, as Count Rumford. When at last in 1806, among the sweeping changes wrought by the Battle of Austerlitz, and Emperor Francis II resigned his position as head of the Germanic body, there were perhaps few who could have told why the head should have been called emperor rather than king. Fewer still, no doubt, who realized that the long succession of Caesars had now first come to an end. I cite this final date of 1806 as interesting, but not as important in connection with a political system which had already quite ceased to exist, save in so far as one might say that the spirit of it still survives in political methods and habits of thought that will yet be long in dying out. With great political systems, as with typical forms of organic life, the processes of development and extinction are exceedingly low, and it is seldom that the stages can be sharply marked by dates. The processes which have gradually shifted the seat of the empire until the prominent part played 19 centuries ago by Rome and Alexandria on opposite sides of the Mediterranean has been at length assumed by London and New York on opposite sides of the Atlantic, from the most interesting subject of study. But to understand them, one must do much more than merely catalog the facts of political history. One must acquire a knowledge of the drifts and tendencies of human thought and feeling and action from the earliest stages to the times of which we live. Excuse me. In covering so wide a field as we cannot, of course, expect to obtain anything like complete results. In order to make a statement simple enough to be generally intelligible, it is necessary to pass over many circumstances, and through many considerations that might in one way and another qualify what we have to say. Nevertheless, it is quite possible for us to discern, in their bold general outlines, some historic truths of supreme importance. In contemplating the salient features of change which has now for a long time been making the world more English and less Roman, we shall find not only intellectual pleasure and profit, but practical guidance. For in order to understand this slow but mighty change, we must look a little into the process of nation making, which has been going on since prehistoric ages and is going on here among us today. And from the recorded experiences of men in times long past, we may gather lessons of infinite value for ourselves and for our children's children. As in all the achievements of mankind, it is only after much weary experiment and many heart-sickening failure that with success is attained. So it has been especially with nation making. Skill in the political art is the fruit of ages of intellectual and moral discipline. And just as picture writing had to come before printing and canoes before steamboats, so the cruder political methods had to be tried and found wanting. Amid the tears and groans of unnumbered generations before methods less crude could be put into operation. In the historic survey upon which we are now to enter, we shall see that the Roman Empire represented a crude method of nation making, which began with a masterful career of triumph over earlier and cruder methods, but has now for several centuries been giving way before a more potent and satisfactory method. And just as the merest glance at the history of Europe shows us Germanic peoples wresting the supremacy from Rome, so in this deeper study we shall discover a grand and far-reaching Teutonic idea of political life overthrowing and supplanting the Roman idea. Our attention will be drawn toward England and the battleground and the 17th century as the critical moment of the struggle. We shall see in Puritanism the tremendous militant force that determined the issue, and when our perspective has thus become properly adjusted, we shall begin to realize for the first time how truly wonderful was the age that witnessed the beginnings of New England. We have long had before our minds colossal figure of Roman Julius as the foremost man of the world. But as the 17th century recedes into the past, the figure of English Oliver begins to loom up as perhaps even more colossal. In order to see these world events in their true perspective and to make them perfectly clear the manner in which we are to estimate them, we must go a long distance away from them. We must even go back as nearly as may be to the beginning of things. How's everybody doing?
Pretty good. You're doing good.
All right. Do you want me to continue reading or would you like me to stop a little bit?
If there's something you'd like to point out with it, what you've already read or something like that. Otherwise, keep going.
Okay. Anybody get bored, give me a yell, okay?
Right on.
If we look back for a moment to the primitive stages of society, we may picture to ourselves the surface of the earth sparsely and scantily covered with wandering tribes of savages, rude in morals and manners, narrow and monotonous in experience, sustaining life very much as lower animals sustain it, by gathering wild fruits or slaying wild game, and waging chronic welfare alike with the powerful beasts and with the rival tribes of men. In the wildest sense of the subject of political history is the description of the processes by which, under favorable circumstances, innumerable such primitive tribes have become welded together into mighty nations with elevated standards of morals and manners, with wide and varied experience, sustaining life and ministering to human happiness by elaborate arts and sciences, and putting a curb upon warfare by limiting its scope, diminishing its cruelty, and interrupting it by intervals of peace. The story as laid before us in the records of 3,000 years is fascinating and absorbing in its human interest for all those who content themselves with the study of its countless personal incidents and neglect its profound philosophical lessons. But for those who study it in the scientific spirit, the human interest of its details becomes still more intensely fascinating and absorbing. Battles and coronations, poems and inventions, migrations and martyrdoms acquire new meanings and awaken new emotions as we begin to discern their bearings upon the solemn work of ages that is slowly winning for humanity a richer and more perfect life. By such meditation upon men's thoughts and deeds is the understanding purified, till we become better to comprehend our relations to the world and the duty that lies upon each of us to shape his conduct rightly. In the welding together of primitive shifting tribes into stable and powerful nations, we can seem to discern three different methods which have followed at different times and places with widely different results. In all cases, the fusion has been affected by war, but it has gone on three broadly contrasted ways. The first of these methods, which has been followed from time immemorial in the Oriental world, may be roughly described as conquest without incorporation. A tribe grows to national dimensions by conquering and annexing its neighbors without admitting them to share in its political life. Probably there is always a first, some incorporation, or even perhaps some crude germ of federative alliance, but this goes a very little way, only far enough to fuse together a few closely related tribes, agreeing in speech and habits, and to a single great tribe that can overwhelm its neighbors. In early society, this sort of incorporation cannot go far without being stopped by some impassable barrier of language or religion. After reaching that point, the conquering tribe simply annexes its neighbors and makes them its slaves. It becomes a superior caste ruling over vanquished peoples, whom it oppresses with frightened cruelty, while living on the fruits of their toil in what has been aptly termed Oriental luxury. Such has been the origin of many Eastern despotisms in the valley of the Nile and Euphrates and elsewhere. Such a political structure admits of a very considerable development of material civilization, in which gorgeous palaces and artistic temples may be built, and perhaps even literature and scholarship rewarded, with money wrung from millions of toiling wretches. There is that sort of brutal strength in it, that it may endure for many long ages until it comes to the conclusion with some higher civilization. Then it is likely to end in a sudden collapse, because fighting quality of the people has been destroyed. Populations that have lived for centuries in fear of impalement or crucifixion, and have known no other destination for the products of their labor than the clutches of the omnipresent tax gatherer, are not likely to furnish good soldiers. A handful of free men will scatter them like sheep, as the Greeks did 23 centuries ago at Kynaxa, as the English did the other day at Tel el Kabir. On the other hand, with the manliness of the vanquished people is not crushed, the sway of the conquerors who cannot enter into political union with them is likely to be cast off, as in the case of the Moors in Spain. There was a civilization in many respects admirable. It was eminent for industry, science, art, and poetry. Its annals are full of romantic interest. It was in some respects superior to the Christian system which supplanted it. In many ways, it contributed largely to the progress of the human race. and it was free from some of the worst vices of Oriental civilizations. Yet, because of the fundamental defect between the Christian Spaniard and the Muslim conqueror, there could be no political fusion. This brilliant civilization was doomed. During 8 centuries or more or less extensive rule in the Spanish peninsula, the Moor was from first to last an alien, just as after 4 centuries the Turk is still an alien in the Balkan Peninsula. Mind you, this is 1898, so I'm just letting you know I'll continue. The natural result was a struggle that lasted age after age till it ended in the utter extermination of one of the parties and left behind a legacy of hatred and persecution that has made history of modern Spain a dismal record of shame and disaster. In this first method of nation making, then, which we may call Oriental method, one now sees but little to commend. It was better than savagery, and for a long time, more efficient method was possible. But leading peoples of the world have long since outgrown it, and although the resulting form of political government is the oldest we know and is not yet extinct, it nevertheless has not the elements of permanence. Sooner or later it will disappear, as savagery is disappearing, as the rudest types of inchoate human society have disappeared. The second method by which nations have been made may be called the Roman method, and we may briefly describe it as conquest with incorporation, but without representation. The secret of Rome's wonderful strength lay in the fact that she incorporated the vanquished peoples into her own body politic. In the early time, there was a fusion of tribes going on in Latium, which, if it had gone no further, would have been similar to the early fusion of the Ionic tribes in Attica or of Iranian tribes in Medea. But when everyone else in this political fusion soon stopped, in the Roman world it went on. One after another, Italian tribes and Italian towns were not merely overcome, but admitted to share in the political rights and privileges of the victors. By the time this had gone on until the whole Italian peninsula was consolidated under the headship of Rome, the result was a power incomparably greater than any other that the world had yet seen. Never before had so many people been brought under one government without making slaves of the most of them. Liberty had existed before, whether in barbaric tribes or in Greek cities. Union had never excuse me. Union had existed before in Assyrian or Persian despotisms. Now liberty and union were for the first time joined together, with consequences enduring and stupendous. The whole Mediterranean was brought under one government. Ancient barriers of religion, speech, and custom were overthrown in every direction, and innumerable barbarian tribes, from the Alps to the wilds of northern Britain, from the Bay of Biscay to the Carpathian Mountains, were more or less completely transformed into Roman citizens, protected by Roman law, and sharing in the material and spiritual benefits of Roman civilization. Gradually, the whole vast structure had become permeated by Hellenic and Jewish thought, and thus were laid the lasting foundations of modern society, of a common Christendom furnished with a common stock of ideas concerning man's relation to God and the world, and acknowledging a common standard of right and wrong. This was a prodigious work which raised human life to a much higher plane than that of which it had formerly occupied, and endless gratitude is due to the thousands of steadfast men who, in one way or another, devoted their lives to its accomplishment. How we doing?
Pretty
Where'd
good.
you, where are we going, Vex? Are we boring everybody?
Well, what do you think, guys in chat? Keep
Everybody
going.
want me to keep reading, or do you want me to end for the time being? Somebody said yes, keep going before.
Yep.
Okay, this is all preparing us for uh, the Puritans and what they went through and how they came to the United States.
Hmm.
Thank you. I'll keep going.
Excellent.
The Roman method of nation making had nevertheless its fatal shortcomings, and it's only very slowly, moreover, than it wrought out its own best results. It was but gradually that the rights and privileges of the Roman citizenship were extended over the whole Roman world. And in the meantime, there were numerous instances where conquered provinces seemed destined to no better fate than had awaited them in the victims of Egyptian or Syrian conquest. The rapacity and cruelty of Caius Verus could have hardly been outdone by the worst of Persian satraps, but there was a difference. A moral sense and a political sense had been awakened, which we could see both wickedness and the folly of such conduct. The voice of Cicero surrounded with trumpet tones against the oppressor who was brought to trial and exiled for deeds which under the Oriental system was from the days of Antarxis to those of the Grand Turk would scarcely have called forth a reproving word. It was by slow degrees that the Romans came to understand the virtues of his own method and learned to apply it consistently until the people of all parts of the empire were, in theory at least, equal before the law. In victory, Oh, excuse me, in theory, I say, for in point of fact, there was enough of viciousness in the Roman system to prevent it from achieving permanent success. Historians have been found, excuse me, historians have been fond of showing how the vitality of the whole system was impaired by wholesale slave labor, by the false political economy, which taxes all for the benefit of a few, by the debauching view of civil office, which regards it as private prerequisite and not as public trust, and worst of all, perhaps, by the communistic practice of feeding an idle proletariat out of the imperial treasury. The names of these deadly social evils are not unfamiliar to American ears. Even the last we have heard ominous whispers in the shape of bills to promote media, media's mediacancy under the under the specious guise of fostering education or rewarding military services. And as it is not a striking illustration of the slowness of which mankind learns the plainest rudiments of wisdom and of justice, that only in the full light of the 19th century, and at a cost of a terrible war, should the people of the United States have got rid of a system of labor devised in the crudest ages of antiquity and fraught with the misery to the employed, degradation to the employers, and loss to everybody. These evils we see in one shape or another have existed almost everywhere, and the vice of the Roman system did not consist in the fact that under it they were fully developed, but in the fact that it had no adequate means of overcoming them. Unless helped by something supplied from outside the Roman world, civilization must have succumbed to these evils. The progress of mankind must have stopped. What was needed was the introduction of a fierce spirit of personal liberty and local self government. The essential vice of the Roman spirit was that it had been unable to avoid weakening the spirit of personal independence and crushing out local self government among the peoples to whom it had been applied. It owed its wonderful success to joining liberty with union. but as it went on, it found itself compelled gradually to sacrifice liberty to union, strengthening the hands of the central government and enlarging its functions more and more, until by and by the political life of several parts had so far died away that under pressure of attack from without, the union fell to pieces, and the whole political system had to be slowly and painfully reconstructed, that is. Okay. Now, if we ask why the Roman government found itself thus obliged to sacrifice personal liberty and local independence to the paramount necessity of holding the empire together, the answer will point us to the essential and fundamental vice of the Roman method of nation making. It lacked the principle of representation. The old Roman world knew nothing of representative assemblies. Its senates were assemblies of notables, constituting in the main, an aristocracy of men who had held high office. Its popular assemblies were primary assemblies, town meetings. There was no notion of thinking of there was no notion of such a thing as political power delegated by the people to representatives who were to wield it away from home and out of sight of their constituents. The Romans' only notion of delegated power was that of the authority delegated by the government to its generals and prefects, who discharged at a distance its military and civil functions. When therefore the Roman popular government, originally adapted to a single city, had come to extend itself over a large part of the world, it lacked the one institution by means of which government could be carried on over so vast an area without degenerating into despotism. Even could the device of representation have occurred to the mind of some statesman trained in Roman methods, it would probably have made no difference. Nobody would have known how to use it. You cannot invest in an institution as you would invent a plow. Such a notion as that of representative government must needs start from small beginnings and grow in men's minds until it should become part and parcel of their mental habits. For the want of it, the home government at Rome became more and more unmanageable until it fell into the hands of the army, while at the same time the administration of the empire became more and more centralized. The people of its various provinces, even while their social condition was in some respects improved, had less and less voice in the management of their local affairs, and thus the spirit of personal independence was gradually weakened. Centralization was greatly intensified by the perpetual danger of the invasion on the northern and eastern frontiers, all the way from the Rhine to the Euphrates. Do what it would, the government must become more and more a military despotism, must revert to the Oriental type. The period extending from the 3rd century before Christ to the 3rd century after was a period of extraordinary intellectual expansion and moral awakening. But when we observe the government changes introduced under the Emperor Diocletian at the very end of this period, we realize how serious had been the political retrogression, how grave the danger that the stream of human life might come to stagnate in Europe, as it had long since stagnated in Asia. Two mighty agents cooperating in their opposite ways to prevent such any disaster were already entering upon the scene. The first was the colonization of the empire by Germanic tribes, already far advanced beyond savagery, already somewhat tinctured with Roman civilization, yet at the same time endowed with an intense spirit of personal and local independence. With this wholesome spirit, they were about to refresh and revivify the empire, but at the risk of undoing its work of political organization and reducing it to barbarism. The second was the establishment of the Roman Church, an institution capable of holding European society together in spite of a political disintegration that was widespread and long continued. While wave after wave of Germanic colonization poured over the Romanized Europe, breaking down the old boundary lines, working sudden and astonishing changes on the map, setting up in every quarter baronies, dukedoms, and kingdoms fermenting with vigorous political life. While for 20 generations the salutary but wild and dangerous work was going on, there was never a moment when the imperial sway of Rome was quite set aside and forgotten. There was never a time when union of some sort was not maintained through the dominion of the Church had established over European mind. When we duly consider this great fact in relations to what went before and what came after, it is hard to find the words fit to express the debt of gratitude which modern civilization owes to the Roman Catholic Church. When we think of all the work, big with promise and of the future, that went on in those centuries, which modern writers in their ignorance used once to set apart and stigmatize as the Dark Ages, when we consider how the seeds of what is noblest in modern life were then painfully sowed upon the soil which imperial Rome had prepared, when we think of the various work of Gregory, of Benedict, of Boniface, and Alfred, Charlemagne, we feel that it is in a sense which the most brilliant achievements of a pagan antiquity are dwarfed in comparison with these. Until quite lately, indeed, the student of history has had its attention too narrowly confined to the ages that have been preeminent for literature and art, the so-called classical ages, and thus a sense of historical perspective has been impaired. When Mr. Freeman uses Gregory of Tours as a textbook, he shows that he realizes how an epoch may be none the less portentous, though it has not had a Taccius to describe it, and certainly no part of history is more full of human interest than the troubled period in which the powerful streams of Teutonic life pouring into Roman Empire were curbed in their destructiveness and guided to noble ends by the Catholic Church. Out of interaction between these two mighty agents has come the political system of the modern world. The moment when this interaction might have seemed on the point of reaching a complete harmonious result was the glorious 13th century, culminating the moment of the Holy Roman Empire. Then, as in times of Caesar or Trajan, there might have seemed to be a union among civilized men in which the separate light of individuals, in which the separate life of individuals and localities was not submerged. In that golden age, alike of feudal system, of empire, and of church, there were to be seen the greatest monarchs in fullest sympathy with their peoples that Christendom has known, and Edward I, a St. Louis, a Frederick II. Then, when in the pontificates of Innocent III and his successors of the Roman Church reached its apogee, the religious yearnings of men sought expression in the sublimest architecture the world has seen. Then Aquinas summed up in his profound speculations the substance of Catholic theology. And while the morning twilight of modern science might be discerned in the treatises of Roger Bacon, while wandering minstrelsy revealed the treasures of modern speech, soon to be wrought under the hands of Dante and Chaucer, and in forms of exquisite beauty, the sacred fervor of apostolic ages found in itself renewed in the tender and mystic piety of St. Francis of Assisi. It was a wonderful time, but after all, less memorial and as the culmination of medieval empire and medieval church, then as the dawning of the new era in which we live today, and in which the development of human society proceeds in accordance with the more potent methods than those devised by the genius of pagan or Christian Rome. Okay, how we doing? You still want me to keep going?
Pretty good.
Everybody want me to keep going? I don't want to bore
If you're
anybody
up
to
to it.
death.
I mean, if you want to take a
Yeah, we're not even halfway through the first chapter, but I'll
if
keep.
you want to take a minute and take a drink or something.
Yeah, I think I'd like to take a drink or have a cigarette or something for a minute, and then we can keep going. Just gonna mark my place here. Yeah, I
Some
think
pictures up on the screen.
this is a really interesting book, and sort of this chapter here kind of brings us into the whole Puritan thing and what happened to them in Europe and the persecution of people and how we all ended up here. So bear with me. The first
Yeah.
chapter is about 48 pages, and yeah, so am I. Survival. The first 48 pages, and we're only on page 16. But I kind of like the comparison. Hi everybody. Um, I just need a cigarette and a couple of sips of whatever I'm drinking. It's kind of weird because I need glasses and I go blurry for a minute, and then I don't know what the hell I'm saying. I'm not a professional reader, so you'll have to pardon my mistakes.
Yeah, like I said, if you need to stop for a second,
No, I'm just gonna have a
yeah,
quick
if you need
cig,
to stop for a second,
if you
that's no
don't
problem.
mind. Yeah, this is
Hmm.
very interesting to me,
No problem.
and I read about 3 chapters of this book, and I'm having a smoke right now, survival, and I'm blown away by the stuff that I've been learning. I learned so much more about what happened and why we came over here and what happened when we were here. And it's like I live in Massachusetts, and so it's all about like the colonies and stuff and what happened here. And it's like it blows my mind the stuff I learned. Oh, I'm sorry, Jim McIntosh. Uh, I don't know. You can find this book on Internet Archives, and I'll put the maybe Vex can put the title and the author. It's the title is The Beginnings of New England. Okay, and you can find it. It's by John Fiske, and the year is 1848. So maybe somebody could give that to Mr. McIntosh.
It's in the
Um,
description.
oh, okay. Yeah. So
I have it
he
down in the
can't.
description.
He has no audio on phone. Yeah, just tell him to look it up on Internet Archives. All right, I'm almost done. I'll read and smoke at the same time. How's that? For the origin of these
If
more
you're good with it,
potent
I'm good
methods.
with it.
Yep. For the origin of these more potent methods, we must look back to the early ages of the Teutonic people. For their development and application on a grand scale, we must look chiefly to the history of that most Teutonic of peoples and its institutions. Though perhaps not more than half Teutonic in blood, the English with their descendants in the New World. The third method of nation making may be called the Teutonic or preeminently the English method. It differs from the Oriental and the Roman methods, which we have been considering in the feature of the most profound significance. It contains the principles of representation. For this reason, though, like all the nation making, it was in its early stages attended with war and conquest, it nevertheless does not necessarily require war and conquest in order to be put into operation. Of the other two methods, war was an essential part. In the typical Oriental nation, such as Assyria or Persia, we see a conquering tribe holding down a number of vanquished peoples and treating them like slaves. Here, the nation is very imperfectly made, and its government is subject to sudden and violent changes. In the Roman Empire, we see a conquering people hold sway over a number of vanquished peoples. but instead of treating them like slaves, it gradually makes them equals before the law. Here, the resulting political body is much more nearly a nation, and its government is much more stable. A Lydian of the 5th century before Christ felt no sense of allegiance to the Persian master who simply robbed and abused him. But the Gaul of the 5th century after Christ was proud of the name of Roman and was ready to fight for the empire of which he was a citizen. We have seen, nevertheless, that for want of representation, the Roman method failed when applied to an immense territory, and the method failed when applied, excuse me, lost my place. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, and the government tended to become more aware and more despotic, to revert toward the Oriental type. Now, of the English or Teutonic method, I say war is not an essential part, for where representative government is once established, it is possible for a great nation to be formed by the peaceful coalescence of neighboring states, or by a union into a federal body. An instance of the former was the coalescence of England and Scotland, effected early in the 18th century after ages of mutual hostility. For instances of the latter, we have Switzerland and the United States. Now, federalism, through its rise and establishment, may be incidentally accompanied by warfare, is nevertheless in spirit pacific. Conquest in the Oriental sense is quite incompatible with it. Conquest in the Roman sense is hardly less so. At the close of our Civil War, there were now and then zealous people to be found who thought that the southern states ought to be treated as conquered territory, governed by precincts sent from Washington, and held down by military force for a generation or so. Let us hope that there are few today who can fail to see that such a course would have been fought with almost as much danger as the secession movement itself. At least it would have been a hasty confession, quite uncalled for and quite untrue, that that American federalism had thus far proved itself incompetent, that we had indeed preserved our national unity, but only at the frightful cost of sinking to a lower plane of national life. Pardon me for a second. Excuse me. But federalism, with its specific implications, was not an invention of the Teutonic mind. The idea was familiar to the city communities of ancient Greece, which, along with their intense love of self-government, felt the need of combined action for warding off external attack. In their Occasion and Aeolian leagues of Greeks made brilliant attempts toward founding a nation upon some higher principle than that of mere conquest, and the history of these attempts is exceedingly interesting and instructive. They failed for lack of principle of representation, which practically unknown to the world until introduced by the Teutonic colonizers of the Roman Empire. Until the idea of power delegated by people had become familiar to men's minds and in its practical bearings, it was impossible to create a great nation, without crushing out the political life of some of its parts. Some center of power was sure to absorb all political life and grow at the expense of the outlying parts until the result was a centralized despotism. Hence, it came to be one of the commonplace assumptions of political writers that republics must be small, that a free government is practicable only in a confined area, and that the only strong and durable government capable of maintaining order throughout a vast territory is some form of absolute monarchy. It was quite natural that people should formerly have held this opinion, and it is indeed not yet quite obsolete, but its fallaciousness will become more and more apparent in American history is better understood. Excuse me, as American history is better understood. Our experience has now so far widened that we can see despotism is not the strongest, but well nigh the weakest form of government. That centralized administrations, like that of the Roman Empire, have fallen to pieces, not because too much, but because of too little freedom, and that the only perdurable government that must be that which succeeds excuse me, must be that which succeeds in achieving national unity on a grand scale without weakening the sense of personal and local independence. For in the body politic, the spirit of freedom is as the red corpuscles in the blood. It carries the life with it. It makes the difference between a society and self-respecting men and women and a society of puppets. Your nation may have art, poetry, and science, all the refinements of civilized life, all the comforts and safeguards that human integrity can devise. But if it is loose, the spirit of personal and local independence is doomed and deserves its doom. As President Cleveland has well said, it is not the business of a government to support its people, but of the people to support their government. And once to lose sight of this vital truth is as dangerous as to trifle with some stealthy narcotic poison. Of the two opposite perils which have perpetually threatened the welfare of political society, anarchy on the one hand, loss of self-government on the other, Jefferson was right in maintaining that the latter is really the more to be dreaded because its beginnings are so terribly insidious. Many will understand what is meant by the threat of secession if you take heed of the baneful principle involved in a Texas seed bill. I need to stop for a minute.
Sure thing.
Sorry, guys.
We were just discussing in chat, basically, our ancestors, where they come from and stuff. Talking about Jim's 1/8 Scott,
Cool.
Scotch French.
I'm a quarter
Me,
Scot.
I was just telling him that. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I got my main bloodline comes from Germany,
Yeah.
or at least a
I
big
think
part of my bloodline.
it's weird. I think my maiden name, my father's side, my father's line and the male part of his line are actually English, but I think they probably came to England from Germany. That's my guess. I haven't traced it back that far yet, but it's kind of weird. Yeah, I need a couple puffs, and I don't know. We're
Yeah, I
like
was
on
told
page
by my.
we're like on page 20 of this part, and there's like, I don't know, 46 pages. So I don't know if I'm gonna make this through all this tonight. Oh,
That's
you're
okay. You can
related.
stop whenever you feel like it.
Uh, how does the chat feel? Would you
Hmm?
like to stop here, or would you like me to continue for a little while?
There you go.
That's
Question.
interesting.
Question to the
Yeah.
chat.
Would Would you like me to continue reading, or would you like me
Yeah, I heard
to
from
stop?
my.
It's okay. You won't insult me.
You asking me?
I'm asking the chat. What would you like? What would
Ah,
you like, Vix?
I'm good to go. As long as you want to
All
do
right,
it.
I'll read a little more. Do my best. I'm just going to turn the big light on so I can see a little better. Hold on a sec.
There you go. Yeah, I think I'm lagging a little bit, so you'll have to forgive me.
No problem. Um, Veritas, I'm reading a book called The Beginnings of New England by John Fiske. Was published in 1898. The subtitle or alternate title is The Puritan Theocracy and Its Relation to Civil and Religious Liberty. We find a lot more about Puritans coming over here uh, from Europe to the colonies later on, but this is sort of the initial thing. It goes on for quite a bit. I just find it interesting. All right, one sip and then I'll start again.
Take your time.
Okay. That the American people are still fairly alive to the importance of these considerations is due to the weary ages of struggle in which our forefathers have manfully contended for the right of self-government. From the days of Arminius and Civilius in the wilds of Lower Germany to the days of Franklin and Jefferson in Independence Hall, we have been engaged in this struggle, not without some toughening of our political fiber, not without some refining of our moral sense, not among our English forefathers only, but among all the peoples of medieval and modern Europe has the struggle gone on, with various and instructive results. In all parts of Romanized Europe, invaded and colonized by Teutonic tribes, self-government attempted to spring up. What may have been the origin of the idea of representation we do not know. Like most origins, it seems lost in the prehistoric darkness. Wherever we find Teutonic tribes settling down over a wide area, we find them holding their primary assemblies, usually in their annual March meetings, like those in which Mr. Hosea Biglow and others like him have figured. Everywhere, too, we find some attempt at representative assemblies based on the principle of these three estates: clergy, nobles, and commons. But nowhere save in England does this representative principle become firmly established. At first in county meetings, afterwards in a national parliament, limiting the powers of the national monarch, as the primary tribal assembly had limited the powers of the tribal chief. It is for this reason that we must call the method of nation-making by means of a representative assembly the English method. While the idea of representation was perhaps the common property of the Teutonic tribes, it was only in England that it was successfully put into practice and become the dominant political idea. We may therefore agree with Dr. Stubbs that in its political development, English is the most Teutonic of all European countries. The country which in becoming a great nation has most fully preserved and the local independence so characteristic of the ancient Germans. The reason for this are complicated, and to try to assign them all would needlessly encumber our exposition. But there is one that is apparent and extremely instructive. There is sometimes a great advantage in being able to plant political institutions in a virgin soil, where they run no risk of being modified or perhaps metamorphosed through contact with rival institutions. In America, the Teutonic idea has been worked out even more completely than in Britain, and so far the institutions are concerned, our English forefathers settled here in an empty country. They were not obliged to modify their political ideas so as to bring them into harmony with those of the Indians. The disparity in civilization was so great that the Indians were simply thrust aside along with the wolves and the buffaloes. This illustration will help us to understand the peculiar features of the Teutonic settlement of Britain. Whether the English invaders really slew all the Romanized Celts who dwelt in the island, except for those who found refuge in the mountains of Cumberland, Wales, and Cornwall, or fled across the Channel to Brittany, we need not seek to decide. It is enough to point out one respect in which the Teutonic conquest was immeasurably more complete in Britain than any other part of the empire. Everywhere else, the tribes who settled upon Roman soil, Goths, Vandals, Suevi, and Burgundians, were Christianized, and so to some extent Romanized before they came to take possession. Even the more distant Franks had been converted to Christianity before they had completed their conquest of Gaul. Everywhere except in Britain, therefore, the conquerors had already imbibed Roman ideas, and the authority of Rome was in a certain sense, acknowledged. But there was no break in the continuity of political events. In Britain, on the other hand, there was a complete break, so that while the continent, the 5th and the 6th centuries are seen in the full midday light of history, in Britain they have lapsed into the twilight of half-legendary tradition. The Saxon and English tribes, coming from the remote wilds of northern Germany, whither Roman missionaries had not yet penetrated, still worshipped Thor and Woden, and their conquest of Britain was effected with such deadly thoroughness that Christianity was destroyed there or lingered only in sequestered nooks. A land once Christianized thus actively fell back into paganism, so that the work of converting it to Christianity had to be done over again. From the landing of the heathen Hengest on the Isle of Thanet to the landing of Augustine and his monks on the same spot, 148 years elapsed, during which the English institutions found time to take deep root in British soil, which scarcely more interference as to essential points than in American soil 12 centuries afterward. The century and a half between 449 and 597 is therefore one of the most important epochs in the history of the people that speak the English language. Before settling in Britain, our forefathers had been tribes in the upper stages of barbarism. Now they began the process of coalescence into a nation in which the principle of self-government should be retained and developed. The township and its town meeting we find there, as later in New England. The county meeting we also find, while the county is a little state in itself and not a mere administrative district. And in this county meeting we may observe a singular feature, something never seen before in the world, something destined to work out as vaster political results than Caesar ever dreamed of. This county meeting is not a primary assembly. All the freemen from all the townships cannot leave their homes and their daily businesses to attend it, nor is it merely an assembly of notables attended by the most important men of the neighborhood. It is a representative assembly attended by select men from each township. We may see it in the germ of the British Parliament and of the American Congress, as indeed all modern legislative bodies, for it is a most suggestive commentary upon what we are saying, that in all countries which have legislatures, they have been copied within quite recent times from English or American models. Sorry about my tripping on my tongue. We can seldom, if ever, fix a date for the beginning of anything, and we can by no means fix a date for the beginning of a representative assemblies in England. We can only say that where we first find traces of county organization, we find traces of representation. Clearly, if the English conquerors of Britain had left the framework of Roman institutions standing there as it remained standing in Gaul, there would have been great danger of this principle and representation not surviving. It would most likely have been crushed in its callow infancy. The conquerors would insensibly have fallen into Roman way of doing things as they did in Gaul. Okay, I think I gotta stop.
I thank you for doing this. This is awesome.
All right, well, we're about halfway through the first chapter, so I hope this interests you as much as it interests me. And I think too, going on later, when we get to the point of talking about the Puritans, I think it's very interesting because, we'll find out what happened to the Puritans, how they separated into another sect, and where they traveled and so on. Oh, you're welcome, Rhyme of the Ancients. Uh, that's the first time I really have done anything like this live. Read. I don't know. I'm not such a good reader, and I'm blurred in my glasses because I need new glasses, and I got a little tongue tied there. But
Well, you
anyway,
definitely did better than I did
well,
doing my reading.
so it's interesting history to me, and I like the style of writing, even though it's a little more flowery than what I'm used to. But I think you'd be surprised at what happens in the next couple chapters. Like I said, we're only halfway done with this chapter, but I think it'd be nice to continue on another night on one of X's shows and eventually read the whole book. So that's like half of chapter one. Excuse me.
Oh, absolutely. I'd love to do this again. We'll just go ahead and slide it for next Monday.
Okay. Yeah, Monday at 11, right? 11
Yes,
Eastern.
yes, ma'am.
Sounds like a plan, man. Thanks everybody for hanging out and listening to me. And uh, that's funny. Veritas is reading as I'm reading. That's weird how you can concentrate on two things at the same time. I obviously can't.
I'm bringing words to life.
Yeah. Well, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope I didn't bore you to tears, because
No, not at all.
I think this history is really worth reading. And I mean, like I said, I got about halfway through it myself. I was reading it all day today, and I was pretty interested. So I hope that you are too, and you enjoy it as much as I have.
I look at it this way. The more I hear about history, it's the more I learn about history. And for those of you who don't know, I basically slept through what little high school I was in, and then I was a dropout. So I didn't get much of history in my brain. So anything that I can get from anybody about, the real history going around, I want to know about it. So thank you very much.
You're welcome, Vex. Yeah, I myself was not enamored of history. In high school, I tried to avoid history like the plague. I really did not like it. My thing was languages and music, and so I had to study languages in order to sing classical music. So after chapter 7, all the pages are blank. Okay, Susanna. Pepperidge Farm remembers.
Oh,
But
God, night. Yeah.
yeah, I hated history and I hated dates, and I can remember in college studying music history, man, and I'd have to sit there with my sister and she'd quiz me and quiz me and quiz me and till I memorized like every note I took in order to be able to pass my tests. It was horrible. I just didn't have a feeling for that. Yeah, I liked science.
Yeah, me too.
I especially like biology.
See, it was the kicker for science. My science class was in the afternoon, so I was actually awake during that class.
And I loved languages, and I had to take German to go to college, but they weren't going to offer it because not enough kids signed up for it. So I ran around and went to all my friends and begged them to take German so I could have German so I could get into college. And they were all cool. They did it. So
Nice.
anyway, so every once in a while we're spouting out German words and stuff. It was kind of fun. Yeah, especially dissection. Um, we did a lot of dissection.
Oh yeah.
So anyway, I'm gonna shut up now. I've talked enough.
Well, like I said, I thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
I might go ahead and close out the show tonight and just make that about that. Unless anybody wants to come up and continue the conversation, go ahead and let me know in chat if anybody wants to jump up. Either that, or I'll go ahead and close her down, retire to Discord, and maybe a voice chat. What do y'all think? I just hope YouTube doesn't strike this one like it did my last one.
Well, if it does, we'll start a StreamYard on my channel. So we'll get around that.
Now, YouTube doesn't like history. Go figure.
I think history is nice. This is an old book, so it'll refer to some things that some people will think is kind of maybe not politically correct or something, but I just think it's interesting. Oh, no, we didn't have that. We didn't have human fetuses in jars. Anyway, nobody's saying they want to come up. So I guess we probably ought to leave it then.
Thanks for the good wishes there, the Salt Lakers. I could use it. As a matter of fact, yeah. I would tell it, it's an old saying, but if we don't know our history, we're doomed to repeat it. I'm learning that almost daily, whether I want to or not.
It's interesting. I was seeing a lot of parallels and different things that's going on today that went on in some of the history that we were just reading. And I think, what's his name? Begins with S. I'm looking up the chat here. Survival. Yeah, he was seeing a lot too. Of parallels, and someday I'm gonna have to come back and hopefully read this chat. Oh, as I missed a lot, I couldn't really look up. Excuse me. Salt Lakers says in science we learned how to make the animals
the frog
different sex. Yeah, I didn't want to say it out loud.
I'll say it.
We get you a strike.
It's a quote.
Okay.
They're making the freaking frogs gay.
Be kind, YouTube. Anyway, I just stuffed my face before I came on with pot stickers. Nobody wants to come up.
That's all right. I'll go ahead and shut her down. And those of you who, well, here, I can go ahead and throw my little Discord link for anybody who doesn't have it. So you can join us.
Sounds like a plan, man.
Okay, there's that thing for y'all. And once again, thank you so much for doing this Scrimshaw, and I look forward to doing it next Monday.
You're welcome.
So, Ollie, I'll come back next Monday, and we'll continue on where we left off. Make sure you don't lose your spot, Scrimshaw.
I marked it. All right. I want to skedaddle. Good night, everybody. Have a good night and a great week.
Good night. And for everyone else, I really do enjoy doing this little history stuff. So, like I said, if there's anything that you guys, would want to bring up as far as history, be some sort of story to tell, I'd love to hear it. The only thing I'd ask is, I try not to embellish because, like I said, I want it as close to the truth as possible. And like I said, I didn't really pay much attention in my history classes. Now I'm regretting it big time. So, help me fill in my gaps, and maybe we'll teach other people. And so, our past isn't lost. It would be such a horrible thing to do that. But with that being said, I yield, and I tell you all good night and sweet dreams.